It's wonderful art, and that can be true, and we just accept that's true. And Donne's poetry, only very extreme circumstances could make it possible, and we can be grateful, perhaps, that those extreme circumstances existed and made this possible.
In his case,
yeah.
But
Right.
now you wouldn't recommend being lost at sea to everyone.
No,
Yeah.
no, yeah.
No, I wouldn't recommend Death Be Not Proud to anyone either.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a wonderful poem. It's a complete gibberish if you look only at the words.
But you
It's the most extraordinary gibberish if you look only at the words, but there's an X factor involved, which I'm quite happy to both assume will persist and will need to be confronted.
Right. You raised this issue, though, of whether or not we would wish the churches emptied on Sundays. And I think you were uncertain whether you would, and I think I would agree. I would want a different church. I would want a different ritual motivated by different ideas. But I think there's a place for the sacred in our lives, but under some construal that doesn't presuppose any bullshit. But I think there's a usefulness to seeking profundity as a matter of our attention.
Sure.
And our neglect of this area, I think, as atheists, at times makes even our craziest opponents seem wiser than we are. And I mean, take someone like Sayyid Qutb, who's as crazy as it gets. I mean, Osama bin Laden's favorite philosopher, but he came out to Greeley, Colorado, I think it was, around 1950,
Yes.
and spent a year in America and noticed that all his American hosts were spending all their time gossiping about movie stars and trimming their hedges and coveting each other's automobiles. And he came to believe that America was or the West was so trivial in its preoccupations and so materialistic that it had to be destroyed. Now, this shouldn't be construed as giving any credence to his worldview, but he has a point. There is something trivial and horrible about the day-to-day fascinations of most of us and most people most of the time. There's a difference between kind of really using your attention wisely in a meaningful way and our perpetual distraction. And traditionally, only religion has tried to enunciate and clarify that difference. And I think that's that's a lapse in our.
I think you've made that point, and we've accepted it, Sam.
Yeah.
And I think that's. I mean, as going back to the thing about whether we like to see churches empty, I think I would like to see churches empty. What I wouldn't like to see, however, is ignorance of the Bible, because you cannot understand literature without knowing the Bible. You can't understand art. You can't understand music. There are all sorts of things you can't understand for historical reasons. But those historical reasons you can't wipe out. They're there. And so even if you don't actually go to church and pray, you've got to understand what it meant to people to pray and why they did it and what these verses in the Bible mean and what this...
But is it only that? Just the retrospective kind of historical appreciation of our
You could more than just
ancestors'
appreciate
ignorance?
it. You can lose yourself in it just as you can lose yourself in a work of fiction without actually believing that the characters are real.
But you're sure you want to see the churches empty? You can't imagine a variety of churches, maybe by their lights an extremely denatured church, a church which has ritual and loyalty and common cause and purpose, but and even
music.
and music, and they sing the songs and they do the rituals, but where the irrationality has simply been laundered out.
Okay, yeah. So you go to those places for funerals and weddings and you have beautiful poetry and music.
And also perhaps for
group solidarity.
Group solidarity to create some project which is hard to get off the ground otherwise.
So I think there's one more tiny thing. I mean, I haven't been tempted to go to churches, and that's a very, very small point, but I mean, one reason that makes it very easy to keep me out of it is the use of the New English Bible instead of James one.
Yes.
I mean, there's really no point. I can't say where anyone goes, and I can see how people stay away. They've thrown away
all the poetry,
a pearl richer than all their tribe.
Absolutely.
They don't even know what they've got. It's terrible. If I was a lapsed Catholic and I brooded about how I wanted my funeral to be, which is not something I would.
You want the Latin Mass.
Yes,
absolutely.
Well, but I mean, there's another issue there, which of course is that when it becomes
I want a proper
intelligible.
Tridentine.
When it becomes intelligible, the nonsense becomes more transparent, and so if it's in Latin, it can survive much better. It's rather like a camouflaged insect. It can get through the barriers because you can't see it. And whereas when it's translated into not just English but modern English, you can see it for what it is.
But now, seriously, then, do you therefore delight in the fact that churches are modernizing their texts and using the...
No, I don't. It's an aesthetic point. No, I don't. No.
That's the worst of both worlds.
I think it seems to
Yes.
me.
And we should be grateful for it. We didn't do this to them.
Yeah, that's right. We didn't impose this on them.
Any more than we...
we weren't clever enough.
Any more than we don't blow up Shia mosques either.
Yeah.
We don't blow up the Bamiyan Buddhas.
Bamiyan Buddhas, exactly.
We don't desecrate. We would be, for the reasons given by Sophocles and Antigone, we would have a natural resistance to profanity and desecration. We leave it to the pious to destroy churches and burn synagogues or blow up each other's mosques. And I think that's a point that we might spend more time making, because I do think it is feared of us, this was my point to begin with, that we wish for a world that's somehow empty of this echo of music and poetry and the numinous and so forth, that we will be happy in a brave new world. And since I don't think it's true of any of us,
it's not.
It's a point one might spend a bit more time making, that indeed the howling wilderness of nothingness is much more likely to result from holy war or religious conflict or theocracy than it is from a proper secularism, which would therefore, I think, have to not just allow or leave or tolerate or condescend to or patronize, but actually, in a sense, welcome the persistence of something like faith.
I
feel I've put it better now than I did at the beginning.
Unintelligently there. I think. What do you mean something like faith?
Yeah, and how like faith?
Something like the belief that there must be more than we can know.
Well,
that's
not
fun.
Dennett believes that. That's not faith.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, we know there's more than we presently know.
Well, that was my original point in saying if we could find a way of enforcing the distinction between the numinous and the superstitious, we would be doing something culturally quite important.
Yes.
When I'm told about this, well, Richard and I did this at Central Hall with Scruton and that very weird team that we debated, who kept on saying, Scruton particularly, well, what about good old Gothic spires and so forth. I said, look, I wrote a book about the Parthenon. I'm intensely interested in it. I think everyone should go, everyone should study, and so forth. But everyone should abstain from the cult of Pallas Athena. Everyone should realize that probably what that sculptural frieze that's so beautiful describes may involve some human sacrifices. Athenian imperialism wasn't all that pretty even under Pericles. So the great cultural project, in other words, may very well be to rescue what we have of the art and aesthetic of religion while discarding the supernatural.
And I think acknowledging the evil that was part of its creation in the first place. That is, we can't condone the beliefs and practices of those Aztecs, but we can stand in awe of and want to preserve their architecture and many other features of their culture, but not their practices and not their beliefs.
I once did a British radio program called Desert Island Discs, where you have to go on and choose your 6 records which you take to a desert island and talk about it. And one of the ones I chose was Bach, Mache dich mein Herz rein.
Oh, yeah.
It's wonderful,
Beautiful
sacred music. And the woman questioning me couldn't understand why I would wish to have this piece of music. It's beautiful music, and its beauty is indeed enhanced by knowing what it means. I mean, but it's, you still don't actually have to believe it. It's like reading fiction.
Exactly.
You can lose yourself in fiction and be totally moved to tears by it.
Yes.
But nobody would ever say you've got to believe that this person existed and that the sadness that you feel really reflected something that actually happened.
Yes, like the Bishop of Dublin who preached a sermon against Swift and said that he'd read every book of Gulliver's Travels and his part, he didn't believe a word of them.
Yes, yes.
So that's the locus classicus, I think, of all that. Well, clearly, we're not cultural vandals, but maybe we should think of the way in which so many people suspect that that's what we are.
Yes.
If I would accept one criticism that these people make, or one suspicion that I suspect they harbor, or fear that they may have, I think that might be the one.
Yes.
Right.
That it would be all chromium and steel and...
Yes,
and
very
no
much
Christmas
so.
carols and no
Yes.
and no menorahs.
They couldn't possibly, anybody who makes that criticism couldn't possibly have read any one of our books.
No. Well, that's another problem too.
which is another
isn't it?
problem.
Is that the people that, of course, this isn't just our books. It's so many books. People don't read them. They just read the reviews and then they decide that's what the book.
We're about to have the Christmas wars again, of course, and this being the last day of September, yeah, you can feel it all coming on. But I always, whenever it comes up, when I go on any of these shows to discuss it, I say it was Oliver Cromwell who cut down the Christmas trees and forbade.
Yeah.
It was the Puritan Protestants, the ancestors of the American fundamentalists,
it's the Bamiyan
Christmas
Buddhas
would be
again.
blasphemy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do at least respect your own traditions, because I do.
Yes.
I think
Yes.
Cromwell was a great man in many other ways as well.
Right.
This is actually a pagan festival.
Well, we were all outed with our Christmas trees last year.
Yes, we had did
I
you
have
see
not the
that?
slightest problem with Christmas trees. I don't know.
No, we had our Christmas card with our pictures of
It's
us.
a good old Norse booze up, and why the hell not?
Well, but it's not just that. I mean, we
I
have
like solstices as much as the next person.
we have an annual Christmas carol party where we sing the music and all the music with all the words and not the secular
And
Christmas
why
stuff.
not? Yes.
And it's just glorious stuff.
Yeah.
That part of the Christian story is fantastic.
Yeah.
It's just a beautiful tale, and you can love every inch of it.
I
without
I
believing it.
once at lunch was next to the lady who was on our opponent at that debate in London,
Rabbi Neuberger.
Rabbi Neuberger, and she asked me whether I said grace in New College when I happened to be senior fellow, and I said, of course I say grace, it's a matter of simple courtesy, and she was furious.
Oh, really?
That I should somehow be so hypocritical as to say grace, and I could only say, well, look, it may mean something to you, but it means absolutely nothing to me. This is a Latin formula which has some history, and I appreciate history. Freddie Eyre, the philosopher, also used to say grace, and what he said was, I won't utter falsehoods, but I've no objection to uttering meaningless statements.
Yes.
Right, that's very good. The Wickham professor.
Yes, the
Wickham
logic,
professor,
yes.
Professor was an old friend. Did we answer your question on Islam?
I don't know. I think it's... Well, I'll ask a related question. Do you feel there's any burden we have as critics of religion to be even-handed in our criticism of religion, or is it fair to notice that there's a spectrum of religious ideas and commitments, and Islam is on one end of it, and the Amish and the Jains and others are on another, and there are real differences here that we have to take seriously?
Well, of course we have to take them seriously, but we don't have to do the network balancing trick all the time. There are plenty of people taking care of pointing out the good stuff and the benign stuff, and we can acknowledge that and then concentrate on the problems. That's what critics do. And again, it's, if we were writing books about the pharmaceutical industry, would we have to spend equal time on all the good they do? Or could we specialize in the problems? And I think it's very clear.
I think Sam's asking more
But
about...
we could criticize Merck if they were especially egregious as opposed to some other company. I mean, if we were focusing on the pharmaceutical industry, not all pharmaceutical businesses would be culpable in the same way.
Yeah, right. Well, and so then the question is what? Should we? Is there something wrong with?
No, I think you're talking at cross purposes. I think Sam's asking about whether we should be even-handed in criticizing the different religions. You're talking about even-handedness about good versus bad. And,
whether all religions are equally bad.
Yes,
Right.
so whether Islam is worse than Christianity or...
I mean, it seems to me that we we fail to enlist the friends we have on this subject when we balance.
It's wonderful art, and that can be true, and we just accept that's true. And Donne's poetry, only very extreme circumstances could make it possible, and we can be grateful perhaps that those extreme circumstances existed and made this possible.
In his case.
Yeah.
But
Right.
now you wouldn't recommend being lost at sea to everyone.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Sayyid Qutb, who's, you know, as crazy as it gets. I mean, Osama bin Laden's favorite philosopher. But he came out to Greeley, Colorado, I think it was, around 1950,
Yes.
and spent a year in America, and noticed that all his American hosts were spending all their time gossiping about movie stars and trimming their hedges and coveting each other's automobiles. And he of whether or not we would wish the churches emptied on Sundays. And I think you were uncertain whether you would, and I think I would agree. I would want a different church. I would want a different ritual motivated by different ideas. But I think there's a place for the sacred in our lives, but under some construal.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't recommend Death Be Not Proud to anyone either.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
a wonderful poem. It's a complete gibberish if you look only at the words.
But you
It's the most extraordinary gibberish if you look only at the words, but there's an X factor involved, which I'm quite happy to both assume will persist and will need to be confronted.
Right. You raise this issue that doesn't presuppose any bullshit, but I think there's a usefulness to seeking profundity as a matter of our attention.
Sure.
And our neglect of this area, I think, as atheists, at times makes even our craziest opponents seem wiser than we are. And I mean, take someone like